Alright, everybody. So this is kind of a odd video, kind of a loose ends thing. Basically, when I was looking up Molten Core tutorial videos, there is a ton of tutorial videos that are focused more on bosses, but not really much about trash. I figure that this is kind of an important topic to cover because trash is going to be something that is always going to take more time than bosses, especially once you start, one-shotting bosses, two-shotting bosses. When you don't need to explain the mechanics of bosses. So it's always going to be relevant to try to speed up trash, but also just get an idea of what the trash can do so that you aren't losing your world buffs or losing valuable consumables before, before their time is allotted. So I play in a pretty, 5 out of 10 serious guild. Nothing super crazy. You'll notice that I have a lot of world buffs on this particular run. This is because we've started to try to implement those into our run, but this isn't really more of a skill session. This isn't meant to be like, hey, look at my sick DPS, or teach you how to play. It's just to discuss some of the core mechanics of some of the trash that you're going to find. So we're going to go ahead a little bit inside this video. So these are our first pull inside of it. We have two giants here. Both of them are Molten Giants. I'm going to be speaking about the trash from a melee perspective here, so I don't know all the debuffs you need to cleanse or anything like that on these particular guys. I'm just going to talk about the things that we do and things that I watch out for as a melee. The Molten Giants here. Pretty simple guys. The main thing to keep out for is just, always be behind like you always should be as a melee. They do some AoE damage that can pulse around you. If you can split them up, it's nice. Right now we are geared to the point where it's not as big of an issue for these particular guys. But if you are finding that you're taking quite a bit of damage, particularly if you start dipping around the 2000 HP range, it's a good idea to either pop a healing pot or get out and start bandaging, just in case your healers are somehow taxed and can't help you out there. So that's the main thing to keep in touch for Molten Giants. Also, another thing I'll mention about that particular pull. This is kind of one of the longer or more HP pulls inside of this early part of the run. So because of that, it is a good place to pop cooldowns. You'll notice that I say using Death Wish. That's just a macro that I put together to say when I'm using my cooldowns. So hopefully my other melee can rotate with me. That way we're using our cooldowns efficiently. But this is an example of a pull where you might want to use a couple cooldowns after aggro is established, because you'll get kind of the full duration of them. I popped mine a little bit late here, but that's fine. So Molten Giants on the first pull, consider using your cooldowns once aggro is firmly established, and as melee, make sure to get out and protect yourself around 2000 HP. All right, next pulls that we're going to do, we're going to have the Lava Annihilator here. Lava Annihilators, really all of the rock elementals in here tend to drop aggro kind of frequently, so you just kind of want to blaze them down as much as you can. Still give the tank a second to get aggro before you jump in on them. That's going to be universal across here. Always let your tank get the first hit or two on before you engage. It doesn't need to be 3 Sunders, but you want to give them something. Okay, Fire Lords. So Fire Lords are a little bit important to talk about. Later on, we will get an example of how things can go wrong with Fire Lords. But basically, they just do a fair amount of damage. They will drop aggro periodically, but they're not too difficult. Later on one of these pulls, we will see that they spawn adds. The adds for the Fire Lords need to be killed. If you don't kill them, then they start to multiply. And if you don't get rid of them quickly, then it can get out of hand. If you have a very geared group, I would say just have the casters kind of swap target and kill the thing off to the side, or you could have your melee swap over. It doesn't take a lot of people, but you want to make sure they die. I would say, if it was me, I would say keep rogues on the Fire Lords as a melee, because they lose a lot by swapping their combo points over. Yeah, still pretty quick to kill on those particular ones. Another Lava Annihilator here. Another thing to note, you can banish Lava Annihilators. I think you can banish Lava Annihilators. You can't banish Fire Lords. It might be the other way around, but I think it's the rock elementals you can banish. Another double Molten Giant pull here. Of note for this one, these guys knock back tanks, so like, you want to be kind of judicious with how you position these guys so you don't get knocked into the lava on the sides of it. It's more of a tank thing, but it's something you can keep in mind. Same idea here, just make sure that you are, using your cooldowns effectively against them. So we're going to be continuing down the path. So something to note about this is we are taking this path right here all the way around. There is a core hound that can patrol inside of this area, and I believe one other enemy that can. So just keep an eye out for that and make sure you're not pulling too aggressively if you have something coming up. One of the ways you wipe on Molten Core Trash is just pulling particularly too much when you aren't expecting a pat. So do keep that in mind. But yeah, Fire Lords, this is all pretty cut and dry going through here, so I'm not going to cover it too much, but you have more Fire Lords. As mentioned, they spawn ads. Here's our pat right away. Here's our lava spawn also. It's kind of hard to see. I'm going to back up a little bit. But you'll be able to catch it. I have the health bars over them. But this pulse right there, this fiery pulse, is your giveaway that that's your giveaway that they have spawned. So keep that in mind. This one right here. This like flame strike looking thing, and this animation right here, that's to tell you that there's a lava spawn that has spawned. So if for some reason you don't play with the health bars up, that's your indicator on that. But once again, you'll notice that this one is padding its way up. That's why I mentioned that you can banish certain things, so that if you were a less geared group than us, you could look to banish the Earth Elemental and finish them off. If you're also lacking damage on the Fire Lords, again, the spawn should take priority, so keep that in mind. But our guild at this point is relatively well geared for Molten Core. I won't say we have everything we need out of here, but we're a lot stronger than the instance calls for. In general, a lot of times there will be enemies that look like one another, but for the most part, a lot of times as a melee, you can treat them relatively the same way. I will point out some standouts in that, but for example, when it comes to rock elementals, in general, you're going to stack on the tank. Like for fire guys, you're just going to hit them and stay away from the front of them. Pretty simple stuff here. Okay, Core Hound. So, this is a Core Hound over here. Core Hounds have a number of debuffs that are pretty rough to deal with. That is up to your healers and decursors to deal with. But just know that they can reduce your attack speed by a considerable amount. They can increase like casting times, all that type of stuff. There is some other things to cover that I will get to as we pull up to it. When the tank pulls, it's very important that you give them plenty of time to establish on the Core Hounds. They have a multi-bite on the front of them. It shouldn't hit you if you're positioning at the back, but if you're being flippant with your positioning, they could easily multi-bite you and kill you. So stay behind them. Another thing to keep in mind is you'll notice I'm giving our tank plenty of time to get a hold of this one. The reason for that is they have a number of moves that can incapacitate the tank and stop them from gaining threat. They have a stun, they have a disorient, which basically you wander around for a few seconds that can hit the whole raid. And these things need to be controlled by making the Core Hound not face the party. So it's important that you try not to pull threat, and that you are allowing enough time for the tank to recover if they get stunned, if they get disoriented, things like that. So just be careful on the pull specifically with those, even more so than some of the other enemies. But that's going to do it for the types of trash for the most part in this first kind of room section. I'm going to move forward a little bit here. Basically, the way we're going to continue on here, just to give you some context, we are going to be continuing along this line. We are going to clear these two fire elementals here and here. And we are going to be moving on to here, taking out these Molten Giants, same thing as before. There is also a couple of extra enemies. You can see over here there's like a lava elemental. There's also a double Molten Giant over this way as well that we're going to address. There's also the potential that you could run into another Core Hound that kind of is padding around. So just be, aware of your positioning on this stuff. Not too difficult. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit here. Okay, so there's our other Core Hound. So this is the room. If you noticed just a moment ago, there was a Core Hound off that way. And you might consider pulling them as well, just to get them out of the way. Yeah, like, there it is right there. If you stick to the left over here, it shouldn't be an issue. But it could be a good idea just to pull them if you're worried about distancing. These are the second pack of giants that I was referring to. Those can be a good thing to pull as well, just to give yourself plenty of room going through. You're also going to probably want to clear them anyway later on, so taking care of them is better. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and move forward a little bit here so we can get some contextual stuff. Okay, so these are the Molten Giants falling down that were next to the bridge. And we are beginning another pull before then. You notice they pulled the Core Hound since it was getting in our vicinity. Again, this is something that we can do since we're considerably overgeared for this. Keep that in mind. Forgive the kind of, the haphazard capture of this stuff, but it was something that I just wanted to get out there. This isn't supposed to be a huge production value thing or anything. So we pulled the Lava Annihilator. So, Lava Annihilators. These guys are a little bit different. So, Annihilators will charge somebody that's not in the group and knock them back, knock everyone back. That's the normal Annihilators you just stack on, and they're the ones that skip. It's the Sergers I'm talking about. So, sorry, I apologize. Annihilators just, stack on top so the tank can pick them back up when they drop threat. You'll see the Surger here in a moment. So you get across these bridges. On that note, the lava surgers, you want to be careful about your positioning on them, because since they knock you back, they could knock you into the lava if you're not positioned well on these platforms. Okay, this is the surger, and there you could see right away the kind of knockback that they do. They will charge a random member of the party, so always make sure that, in this instance, I'm facing this way, because there's no way that he can push me off to the edges here. Okay? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in this situation, and I understand that you never want to attack the front of an enemy if you can avoid it, but I also don't want to transition like this, because if he catches me right here, then I go into the lava and I burn up and I die, and then everyone laughs at you and you lose your world buffs. Right. So that's the basic thing with lava surgers. Going into the next room, we're going to have one of the more dangerous things that can happen. You can see one of them here, for example. These guys over here are Fire Imps. Fire Imps have a large AoE that they can do. They need to be dealt with very quickly. If you pull multiple packs of Fire Imps, it is very easy to wipe your party. If you pull Fire Imps with the rock elemental that's in there, it could be pretty bad news as well if your damage is not very high. If that happens, if the rock elemental gets pulled, it should be held by a tank, and you should focus the Fire Imps, because they will wipe you. We're going to get a nice look at those in just a moment here. So a good way to deal with this is you kind of hold into this cubby, you pull to this cubby, that way you don't need to worry about people getting knocked off from the lava surger. See, I approached there kind of aggressively. I could have waited a moment or approached at a slightly different angle, but unfortunately we got the Fire Imp pull as well, but we knew that we could handle it because we've done it before, so it wasn't the biggest issue in the world. But again, you'll notice that we prioritize the Imps because you got to get those taken care of. We hug this right wall here to make it so that we don't pull more fire imps. These imps also tend to respawn very quickly, so if you do wipe leading up to Lucifron, then you might have to consider holding up so that you can clear the imps or do summons. Picking up this Lava Surger here as we go into the cubby, we tank him inside of there. That way we don't need to worry about the imps. We're going to be pulling a second imp pack that goes through this door. There's also one more Serger that we're going to pick up, as you can see. So you want to get the Serger, and then you can think about picking up the imp pack if you would like to. I don't think you need to, though, for everything, but it's usually a good idea. So yeah, you'll see our tank come back and he's pulling the imps. So you pick up these imps, get rid of them, and then continue to hug the right wall so you can head into the Lucifron hall. You can see there like the bursts of fire damage that they're dealing as well. As a melee, as a side note, you should be coming with a lot of normal fire protection pots. If you ever feel pressured in this situation, a normal fire protection pot could be warranted. I've tend not to need them, so I don't know the HP value you should be worried about at that point, but just know that it should be an option available to you. The fire protection pots will protect you more than a healing potion for the most part, so keep that in mind. If you're really worried, you could always pre-pop a fire pot. The fire pot lasts for 1 hour on the buff that absorbs damage. So you could pop one before you even enter this cave section, and, you know, if it ever goes down, you could pop another one if you want to. Keep in mind, though, I mean, that's money to spend, so you might not want to do that. Okay, so this is us keeping to the side wall, as mentioned. You can be a little flippant in that area. You can kind of cut it wide like most of us do, but just be aware that there are things in that area. So, we have the core hounds. So, we aren't marking them now because we tend to have a pretty easy job with them at this point. The core hounds here, the smaller ones, they come in a group. You could mark them if you would want to. The reason why you might mark them is you have to kill all of these relatively close to each other. It's not as strict as I had heard people say, like they make it sound obsessive. But you do need to kill them within like 10 to 15 seconds, like all of them together. So because of that, you're going to AoE them down. My recommendation as a melee, if you have high melee DPS guys, like I'm one of the higher melee DPS guys, we have some other warriors that do a lot, we have some rogues that do a lot. I usually coordinate with my group in the party chat, and I'll say, hey, I'm taking triangle or something. And hopefully what that means is each of you pick a different target. That way, your single target damage is getting split into all the targets. That way, you're not killing things way too early. It is possible if you have a short cooldown that you might want to use it on the hounds here just to kind of burn them all down, but not necessary. Keep in mind that you will have a boss after one more of these pulls, so you don't want to use a bunch of cooldowns that could be used for the actual boss. So as you can see, we're going in. If they don't mark up, my thing that I do is I usually pick one in the middle of the pull. Because like the first one that gets pulled and is running towards the party, everyone targets, right? So I tend to pick one in the middle or in the back. After that, you want to kind of, you know, if you find your targets getting low or some of them are still high, you want to tap over to them and put out some damage. So here's something to note about the pull. This is Lucifron, this is the boss of the area. He comes with 2 adds, and they come down this hallway. And they go over here. You do need to pull 2 packs of core hounds in order to make this a safe pull. So just be aware that this guy pats, and don't be too aggressive on pulling him until you're ready as a group. But that's it for the trash. Just make sure you make the 2 pulls here for the core hounds and get into the boss for Lucifron. As for Lucifron itself, I'm going to not really talk too much about bosses. in particular, but I'll touch on it very briefly as a melee, just so that you guys are aware. As a melee, the things that you need to worry about is there are 2 adds. You kill those adds before you kill Lucifron. Some guilds will stack them and kill everything all at once. That is a little bit of what we do as a guild, because we're on a higher, gear level. They do a curse that needs to be decursed, and they mind control. Things that you can do as a melee to help out in this fight. If you have I believe it's restorative potions or restoration potions, they remove curses, magical effects for over 30 seconds. That is really nice for helping your healers to be able to cope with, decursing more critical people. So I would recommend that as an option for you guys. Other than that, though, just be careful of the mind control. Something that you can do. On the previous pull of Core Hounds, after you've killed them, but before they disappear, warriors should blow their intimidating shout. The reason for that is if you get mind controlled, the boss tends to like to use your intimidating shout to fear everybody. You could get feared into the further Core Hounds. You could get feared back into the tunnel and pull Imps. So, on that last pack of Core Hounds, burn your intimidating shout. If not, then, if you aren't going to pull that quickly, just make sure that the first 25 rage that you get is an intimidating shout, just to get rid of it. Okay, so that was something that I wanted to catch, but I hadn't caught offhand. As for cooldowns in this, there's a couple of philosophies you can have with it. The first philosophy is if your guild is still struggling or still early, you could wait for initial threat to get established, then blow your cooldowns. That way you get rid of the 2 adds. That can reduce a lot of stress. The second philosophy is that you could use it on the actual boss Lucifron itself after you've gotten the adds down. The adds don't have a ton of health. They only have 92,000, as you can see, but, if you're just starting out here, people are still, learning how to play in a raid context or something like that. It could be important to blow cooldowns early rather than later. You can see I get dominated mind here, and there's not really much I can do about that personally as a melee. I just got to get taken care of, basically. But that's going to do it for the trash up to Lucifron. I'm going to cut these into video segments so that I can make them a little bit more digestible. But that's going to do it for Lucifron. I guess I'll cover... Actually, I'm going to cover Magmadar as well, because it's not too far to him. So after Lucifron, you get your loot, whatever. There's a couple more of the Core Hound packs. Same deal with those again. Just make sure you're splitting damage on them. Nothing too excessive there. Then you get to Magmadar. So Magmadar, the things you need to know as a melee, he has a fear. So, hopefully Tremor Totems are down if you're an Enhance. Or, if you're a warrior, get ready to Berserker Rage. If you're undead, be ready to Will of the Forsaken, all that good stuff. As a melee, you just got to make sure that you're behind him. The core mechanic that he does that you need to worry about is that he will drop fire patches on the ground. Don't stand in the fire. It's possible that he could drop it directly on the melee. In that case, all the melee needs to move. In general, I find that most of the time our melee either splits in 2 groups behind him or kind of fans out behind him to try to mitigate that risk. So that's something you could try out. If you find that 2 fire spots get dropped into melee, or if the tank gets a fire spot dropped on them, the boss will need to be moved. So as melee, be ready to react and move safely in such a way that you don't step on fire, but you also don't get in front of Magmadar, or else you're going to get blown up. So we're doing the pull. Hunters need to Tranquilizing Shot to get rid of an enrage on this fight, but again, that's not really for melee. Trying to get to the early part of the fight here. So this is the start of the fight, and you'll see relatively early on that we're going to get feared. Yeah, right there. So yeah, Tremor Totems, Will of the Forsaken, Berserker Rage, all that good stuff. Other than that, this is actually a fight where I feel like melee excels at a fair amount. So just be aware, don't pull threat like you might see sometimes. You'll notice the fire got dropped there, so all the melee had to split. It's not going to kill you instantly if you don't move, but you want to move out of it. Don't mess with your healers. Try and help them out. It also puts a dot on you, so if you do get hit by it, then you might want to consider chugging a fire pot, or chugging a fire pot before the pull, just so that you're dealt with it before it becomes an issue. But I mean, that's Magmadar, really. Just, stay out of the fire, don't get in front of him, be ready to break fear, and it's possible that it might need to get moved if there's too much fire in melee. Alright, so that'll be it for this video. We will be back with rest of MC Trash, or up to the next couple bosses.